Imagine a world where you don't know your parents. They either dropped you off at a doorstep when you were young, or they brought you to an orphanage or adoption agency if you were lucky. This is the reality of my sister, although many people can't imagine being in this situation. International adoption is important, not only because some of you in this class may choose to adopt, but because many children are left year after year without homes to go home to. International adoption is difficult, and this can actually deter many families, but the expense of adoption, the complications in choosing an agency, the eligibility requirements, and actually helping the child adjust after they're adopted can be very hard. The first thing to consider when adopting is the expense. According to Gang Fan in his article, A Special U.S.-China Relationship, a family must have a net worth of $80,000 to be able to adopt a child, which can be difficult for some families. For my middle class family, not only was that difficult, but it was hard for us to pay the travel expenses, the eating expenses, the living expenses, especially since we were in China during the New Year. Also, it was very hard for us to actually get to bring my sister home. We had to pay an orphanage fee and an adoption agency fee simply to be able to bring my sister back. Along with all the expenses that come with international adoption, there's also the eligibility criteria to be met, which my phone interview with my parents, they explained was the hardest part. They talked about how they had to get medical work, hepatitis shots, tetanus shots, and also something that many people don't know is that to be an adoptive family, you have to have a body fat percentage below a maximum amount. I think it's about 40%, maybe a little less. After you get your medical work done, there's phone interviews, home inspections, many different measures that these adoption agencies take to make sure you're suitable parents. One thing that we have in our house now is a fire extinguisher, which we hadn't had before, but that was because of the home inspections. We needed to get one to be allowed to bring my sister back to our house. My parents also had to undergo CPR and parenting training, which was strange since they already had a child, but it's just another measure that the adoption agencies take to make sure you're fit parents. Clearly, this process can be very grueling, and according to Gang Fan, it can take up to 2 years to actually become eligible to adopt, which is a big deterrent for many families. Another difficulty before getting your child is choosing an agency, which I talked a little bit about before. This is the one final step the parents have to do before actually meeting the child. Agencies will determine what child you bring home, so they must be chosen carefully. And there's also some scams, according to Seema Mohapatra in her article about adoption. In one case, a family spent $150,000 only to figure out that their adoption was a scam, and it fell through at the end. My parents chose the Great Wall Adoption Agency simply because a family at my church had used it before and they said it was reliable. We were led by our agency leader through China and through the entire adoption process, along with 10 families and eventually 9 babies and 1 5-year-old. Perhaps the most difficult and crucial part, according to Gang Fan, of the adoption process is helping the children adjust after they leave the orphanage. According to my parents, my sister, there were many barriers and obstacles to overcome when we actually brought her back to the hotel we were staying in from the orphanage. First of all, she had been raised by a host of female nannies. There were no men in the orphanage unless they were babies, but many times babies in China are left in orphanages only if they're female, and I'm sure many of you have heard of that before. So naturally, my sister had a connection with her nanny and with the other children she was raised with, and they were basically her family. So she was kind of detached when we took her away and didn't really form a connection with my parents right away. Also, since she was only raised with female nannies, my sister developed a fear for men, and she would actually not let my dad hold her, touch her, even look at her without her getting uncomfortable or crying for the first few weeks. Another thing is life was very different in the orphanage for my sister than it was outside the orphanage. They had to sit in potty chairs for 12 hours a day with their arms strapped down, and it was the only way the nannies could take care of that amount of children without getting overwhelmed. So my sister learned at a very young age not to move or else her arms would get strapped down. Therefore, she didn't move around a lot when we first brought her back to the hotel. Also, many babies suffer health issues because of the lack of health care in the orphanages. And the 5-year-old in our group specifically had many dental issues that they had to take care of. As you can clearly see, the difficulties of international adoption are severe, and it deters some families that want to adopt. Not only is there a great expense to adopt, but choosing an agency is difficult, becoming eligible to be parents is difficult, and then helping your child adjust after adoption is also very hard. Today, thousands of children like my sister are left in orphanages across the world. The question is, what will you do about it?